GOAT. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Chris.
And we had told you this week we were going to do Barney and the Cave Rescue, but we had an opportunity that we had to take advantage of ASAP, and we're doing it. We have Chris Hudson on, the writer, director, and editor of the Mayberry Effect documentary exploring the impact of the Andy Griffith Show. He's an Emmy-nominated and Silver Telly Award-winning television producer and director who has worked in television for over 20 years, and we're so excited to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that you're the third Chris to have on the show. So this rounds out. We are officially have had the most Chris's of any podcast.
So you're Christopher, I'm Chris, and the other guy was Christoph. Is that how we all keep it straight?
Yeah, for sure.
What I think we need to do is I'll just drop off and have three Chris's. Just you guys just try to keep up with each other, and you keep asking Chris questions.
You're gonna make me host?
Yep. Yeah, that'll work. So before we dive in, I just give the listener kind of a sense of, and the viewer a sense of what the Mayberry Effect is. If you haven't seen it already, we're going to run the trailer before we dive into the interview. So here it is.
Mount Airy has become a kind of Americana pilgrimage site.
We have fans all over the country that gather at huge events like Mayberry Days every year. We get together as large groups. There's tribute artists who dress up like characters from the Andy Griffith Show.
It's ain't but no bricks.
I'm ready for tonight.
All right, people, let's straighten up over here. He just looks like Andrew Robinson. From the halls of Mount Tyson to the shores of Tippaway.
What makes us do that?
Mayberry is my hometown.
All right, good stuff. Before we dive in, this episode's production and artwork are managed by Pod Machine, who does great work at a great rate. If you want to learn more about this service, go to podmachine.com. You can also get a 10% discount by entering Loaded Goat in the promo code section if you purchase one of their plans. So, I guess my first question is, give us a little background. I mean, I watched the documentary. You are a very seasoned documentary filmmaker just based on what we saw, but I'd love to hear how you guys started and what brought you to Mayberry.
Well, I always tell the story that I grew up watching PBS, travel logs, and any kind of documentary I can get my hands on. Ken Burns, huge influence on me, and Rick Steves, any of his travel logs. So when I was in college, I'd always done some video work, and it was really my dad who said, hey, you need to go to the WTVI, the PBS station, and see if you can become an intern, if that's something you really want to do. So he kind of drove me over there. The first person I met was Randy Fulp, who ended up being the cinematographer, and he did all their documentaries. He became a best friend, became a mentor, and just started kind of learning everything I could about doing documentaries, whether it's film, learning how to shoot a documentary, learning how to do an interview, learning how to edit. So WTVI and PBS is a huge impact in my life. After I graduated from Queens College in Charlotte, they offered me some different jobs and some different projects to work on. And the first big one was the World War II documentary we did, How I Survived World War II. And that's the one that got me the Emmy nomination. And did a spinoff documentary about a 38th Evacuation Hospital unit out of Charlotte. And because documentaries pay a whole lot, I had to go find some real work. Yeah. And ended up working in the commercial industry, doing TV commercials for businesses in Charlotte and Greensboro and around North Carolina. And after about 8.5 years, I left that company, and my wife and I own a children's theater. And so was able to end up going back, not only working for myself, but having the time to go back to grad school. And I went to Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem and got my master's in documentary film in 2018. And so that's kind of the shortened version of how I got to where I am. But the Mayberry Effect ended up being my thesis film in grad school. And so I created a 45-minute version for grad school. And after I graduated, I knew I wanted to make it into a feature film. So I spent another, 3 years kind of fine tuning it and getting all the pieces that I needed to really make it the way I wanted to make it.
So was the thesis?
I'd imagine that's tough to do. Did you feel, maybe I'll rephrase this question, with the 45-minute, did you feel like it was unfinished? Or did you kind of know that there were ways that you wanted to stretch it out and further develop?
It was a finished version, but there was a bigger part of the story that I wanted to tell. So I wanted to really take David Browning's story and kind of go from the beginning, middle, and end of him kind of, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but kind of him kind of retiring at the end. And so I didn't have that in the original 45-minute version. The other part that I thought was important was the African-American part of the documentary. A lot of people, there's always that argument of there were no African-Americans in the Mayberry. And, the reality is they just weren't the key players. They weren't the co-stars or any of the main roles except for one. And so it was kind of, I wanted to really, nip that in the bud for a little bit and just say, hey, here's the issue, here's the problem, here's the dialogue. Let's talk about it and put that in there, because honestly, all the time that I've spent in Mayberry, it is predominantly white. There are a number of African-American fans. You just don't see a lot of them, much less a whole lot that would go on camera to really talk about it. So I really needed to make that point just to put it out there. But I think some key scenes and key moments that I really wanted to put in that I just couldn't get in doing everything myself on this documentary for grad school, just didn't have time. So
was the 45-minute piece, was it, I guess, for lack of a better word, did you stay in North Carolina the entire time and expand? Because, you go to a lot of these, you travel to all over the country to meet with a lot of these people who have kept it going, like Alan Newsom, who lives in Alabama. And I was just curious, if that was kind of part of the expanded documentary.
I think it was still in there the way I wanted it to. So it wasn't just about North Carolina. It really, Danville, Indiana was still in it. Going down to Alabama was still in it. Flying over to, let's see, that's not true. The two professors that I interviewed in England, I did that after I graduated. So it was more of an American version of it, Southern version of it, I guess, if you will, than the fuller expansion of the psychology behind nostalgia and kind of going down that rabbit hole a little bit. So, but I picked up and traveled a lot just to get what I could to tell that 45-minute story. So.
Yeah. One thing I really like about the documentary, I enjoyed the documentary very much. I thought it was very, very informative. I know a lot about the Andy Griffith Show, but there were things in there that I had never heard before, and there were aspects of it. But I did love the fact that I think there's always a little bit of a tug of war that I feel as an Andy Griffith fan, as a Southerner, that I feel like there's almost too much emphasis put on the kinder, gentler time, as opposed to the idea of it's really more about treating other people. To me, it's always about people treating other people with respect and dignity. That to me is always what is so much more that speaks to me about the show. Because I feel kind of like the kinder, gentler time. If you pick up any history book, you're kind of like, times weren't always that. I never found a kinder and gentler period in history. So that's one of the challenges I see. But I love the fact that you walked in with that you interviewed the professors on nostalgia, but also, got other people's perspectives on what the nostalgia means to them. And I was just kind of wondering, when you were putting it together, you're kind of like, is this going to be a tough? As you were putting it together, were you still kind of figuring out what's the narrative going to be here and how I really explain the effect, the gravitation to the show?
I think what I wanted to start off with, I didn't want to create another documentary about the Andy Griffith Show. I felt like the stuff that I'd seen on A&E and some of the History Channel and any of those kind of documentaries dive more into the Andy Griffith Show and about the history of it. This is more the modern day version of what's going on and why that should apply to our lives today. So I wanted to explore the idea of nostalgia, because when you start researching it and getting into it, nostalgia is such a powerful thing. It's a powerful message. It's a powerful feeling. And it makes millions and billions of dollars and is used by so many different places and companies. Well, it's no different than Mount Airy, North Carolina, or any other place that's selling the idea and the feeling of Mayberry. So, it was important to kind of stay on the characters, stay on David Browning and Alan Newsom and Kenneth Junkin and some of them, and let them kind of continue their arc, but to kind of plug in where I could what's going on, in places that people would never think of. Danville, Indiana at the time, knowing, Mount Airy, North Carolina makes sense because Andy Griffith was born there. Danville, Indiana is just out in the middle of nowhere, basically, and there's people that are interested. Now, when you have people come to Mount Airy for Mayberry Days, they know the Andy Griffith Show. These are like professional trivia, experts about the Andy Griffith Show. The farther out you get from that, the less people know about the Andy Griffith Show. They think that it was filmed in North Carolina. They didn't know it was filmed in California. So you start to kind of see across the country the love of the Andy Griffith Show, but not a lot of people knowing about the Andy Griffith Show. So I don't know if I answered all of your question in that, but I think what you said earlier is not so much about the good old days, but when you go to Mount Airy, when you do a Mayberry event, when you go hang out with some Mayberry people, it's just a lot of fun. I mean, it has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. It is just a good time of, having a lot of fun and treating people nice. And so why can't we do that at home? Why can't we do that with our next door neighbors? Why can't we do that, with our family? So it's just, I guess, a reminder of what I'm trying to do.
Were you a huge fan of the show growing up? I always imagined I feel like it's hard to be a Southerner and not, the show's there. So, I mean, either you're a huge fan of it or you're not.
I remember growing up, and before dinner time, it was always on at least one episode, if not two episodes, from like 5 to 6 o'clock before dinner. So I remember always watching it, and always had, I guess it was just a sense of Andy Griffith Show, then dinner time, almost every night. To say I was a big fan, I wasn't a big fan, but I just knew the characters in the episodes. It's kind of shocking to me that when I started the documentary, living 45 minutes from Mount Airy, North Carolina, how much I was missing and how much I didn't know. And even during this process of making the film, still, gosh, if you put me in a trivia competition, there's no way I could compete. I mean, some of these fans are just mega huge fans. So I learned enough to be able to tell the story I wanted to tell. And then luckily with people like Jim Clark and Alan Newsom, I could always say, hey, is this correct? Am I going down the right path here? Double check, triple check, this film in this section here to make sure I'm getting it right. Because if not, maybe your fans are going to tell me that I didn't really quickly. So
it was funny. We've had Alan Newsom on a few times, and he's always been gracious to join us. And he gave us a trivia question, and he gave us one of his trivia quizzes, and both of us were just pitiful. I mean, I was like, Christopher, I've got this, and I was like, no, I don't have this. It was bad.
I love hearing Alan tell the story of new people jumping in on his podcast or anything going, oh, I know all about the Andy Griffith Show. And that's always a challenge to Alan. Alan's going to take it to the next level. And so it's that, to me, being that kind of a fan for anything is pretty amazing. And that's why I'm kind of interested in it, of the fan culture of, the Star Trekkers, Star Wars, anything. That's just, I love those kind of documentaries of watching people fan out about something, spending all their money on it, and then wondering why.
Yeah. I was curious on this. We've never asked Alan, and we've never asked other people who've been on the show. I mean, the commitment I saw, it seems like the folks who are really keeping this going, who are playing these characters, it seems like they're on the road quite a bit during the year.
I know they usually do maybe 4 to 5 events a year, and the majority of them, it's all out of pocket, their own pocket. And so the commitment that's there, where they go, how far they travel is pretty incredible. And it's even more incredible if they're driving their squad car from Alabama up to Indiana or wherever it is, because you're only going about 55 miles an hour the entire trip. So
and no power steering either. That's not good. Yeah. So I was going to say, so you've done the Mayberry Effect. Do you have another documentary that you're working on these days?
I am Well, I had about 90 hours of footage that I shot for the Mayberry Effect. So I've been trying to go through the other 88 and a half hours of footage I didn't use to see if there's a new story in there. And I think I have enough, and I can go shoot a little bit more, kind of tell the story of not only Barney Fife and Don Knotts, but the tribute artists that are kind of following the David Browning's footsteps afterwards. It's kind of, there's an interesting parallel story there of David Browning leaving the Mayberry world and as the main tribute artist, and then Don Knotts leaving, the Andy Griffith Show. And how do you replace, Don Knotts and David Browning in this kind of scenario? And so people do the best they can, and all the other tribute artists, Terry and Brett and Rick Roberts, they're so much fun, but they got big shoes to fill trying to follow David Browning's, Mayberry deputy. But so there's something there that I'm working on. I kind of laid out a lot of that footage on the timeline. It's about 4 or 5 hours right now to cut down. And then the kind of something that spun off here, one of the people that I met at Mayberry Days was Dreama Denver. And she was Bob Denver's wife. And so she comes to Mayberry Days every year and signs autographs of Bob's books and her book. And she has a really interesting story about her and her relationship with Bob. And so the time I've spent with her, I've gotten to know her. And so we're in the process of working on a budget and trying to create a doc series about Bob Denver and her relationship and Bob's, background in history and her history. And they have an autistic son. And so that kind of really adds an interesting storyline there where Bob went for 20 plus years when they had their autistic son, because he kind of stayed home and helped. And so really trying to work hard on that. So, and then I have thousands of other ideas, just really time to work on them all. So
how was meeting Betty Lynn?
Betty is the sweetest. She was the sweetest lady I've ever met. I don't know if y'all ever had a chance to meet Betty.
No.
She just kind of opens up her arms and her face and just smiles and laughs and has a good time. And just, you are immediately a best friend to her, it almost seems like. And so we got to spend about, 25 minutes to do an interview before she signed autographs. I guess this was back in 2017, maybe. And while I was filming her signing autographs for people, she was telling people in line about me being at Wake Forest. And she just met me. It's just like, you're the person everybody needs to pay attention to. I'm just I need to be a fly on the wall over here and just kind of film you doing your thing. So, but literally, she never turned any fan away. She's always just sweet, just talks to everybody. Mount Airy had a jewel living there for a number of years when she was there. I know everybody misses her, but wish I had more time with her.
Yeah. Yeah. That was something I thought about as I was watching this. I was wondering, when did you wrap up footage? Because you obviously released this during the pandemic, and I was wondering, and I'm just kind of like, did you wrap up right in 2019 as far as shooting, or did you put it, or had you completed it earlier than that?
Now, I had a film festival version in 2020 that I sent out.
Okay.
And then before got distribution and we got it out onto all the major platforms, there were 3 or 4 other shots I had to replace or put in based off discussions that I had with certain people of making it better. And so I was literally editing that thing up to the last second to get it to the distributor and fixing the audio and everything. So it's not that much different from the original, the film festival version, but yeah, it was to the very, very end.
Yeah. Speaking of platforms, I watched it on Tubi, which is, I feel like the greatest thing of all these. It's got great documentaries and great movies, and all these movies that were in the video store in the 80s that were rated R that I couldn't watch because I couldn't rent them, that you can't find anywhere. And I see them on Tubi now, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to finally check this movie out. And but then I know it's on Tubi, but it's basically on every major platform at this point, right?
Well, most of them, yeah. So it's on Amazon and iTunes, Apple TV, and Google Play, and Hoopla, Crackle. But Tubi's been the best format for me because I'm a purist. I'd rather see a film all the way through without any kind of commercials. But as a filmmaker in this scenario, it's been the best since sliced bread, to be honest with you. So a lot of people would rather watch it for free, and then the royalty check I get is a lot better. So I'm pushing Tubi much harder than any other platform right now. So
that's fair. Well, by all means, you can watch that and all those movies you never got to watch when you were a little kid. And so, what is your favorite Andy Griffith episode, if you have one?
Mine was always Citizen's Arrest. Yeah. That was always my favorite. It always sticks out every time. So
we just did that one.
We just did that one. Yeah, I had so much fun. Yeah, we that was actually our first video one that we did.
It'll go down in history. There'll be a documentary made on that being the first video that we did.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, not to plug, but if you're doing a follow-up of the next iteration, we are kind of a unique in the Mayberry world of we're sitting down. I'm a seasoned fan. Chris is a millennial watching it for the first time. And so each time it's really like, here's what I thought. What did you think? And so we have a little fun with it.
The amount of astute comments I say is just unbelievable.
Oh, it's profound. I mean, those professors you spoke to in England have got nothing on what Christopher has to say.
I agree more.
What was fascinating about those professors were one was from Greece, Dr. Constantine Siddiquides, and he taught at University of Chapel Hill. And while he was living in North Carolina, he watched the Andy Griffith Show. So he knew about the Andy Griffith Show. And then the other professor, Tim Walshut, he's from the Netherlands. He was getting his doctorate at Chapel Hill. So he too watched the Andy Griffith Show. So for them to be able to sit there and talk about the Andy Griffith Show, the psychological effect it has on you, and the nostalgic, there are only two people in the world that I've been able to get that info from. So I need to go back and just watch their interviews because they're very, very profound and deep, and some of it I don't understand. But there's somebody described the Andy Griffith Show as multiple layers, and whatever you bring to it, you'll find from it. So you can find the surface level of, it's comedy, it's fun, there's a good story, they're helping people, or Andy's helping Barney, or whatever it is. And then there's all these other kind of layers if you really want to get into it deep. That most people don't want to, and there's a lot of psychological effect going on there in that show. It was an amazing show.
One thing that was pointed out by the fans, and I can't remember if it was pointed out by the professors, but it was said that, we always joke about Otis's alcoholism just being treated like it's just kind of a funny little quirk that he has. And then it's something, so that alcoholism is kind of laughed off, but there were a lot of other issues of not being able to pay your bills, having falling on hard times, some intense struggles between family members that were really, they weren't laughed off, and they were really something that people were dealing with in Mayberry.
I think that's why so many people connect with that show. Mm-hmm. It's not only funny, but they can see themselves in the show and understand some of the struggles that the people have, and even the struggles that Barney has and that Andy has to address, or the struggles that Opie has that Andy tries to address, or even Andy's own problems that other people address. So I think there's a deeper connection there because of some of those problems and understanding. And I've heard a lot of people say, when I was watching that show, I was watching, my next door neighbor or people down the street that were exactly like that on television and loved it. So the writers got it right so many times.
Yeah, they did. Well, this has been great. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we're so glad you'll be able to join us next week for Barney and the Cave Rescue. If folks, beyond the streaming platforms, if folks want to find you, where should they go?
Yeah, they can come visit me at the mayberryeffect.com. Check out the website. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, and I just started my TikTok page, so working on that. That's been an interesting audience, let's just say that, but so all social media.
Absolutely. All right, any final thoughts, Christopher?
No, this has been great. Thanks. Wait, which one?
You, Christopher Cordingly.
Don't give my last name. People are gonna find me
your last name is everywhere. It's plastered all over the place.
No, thanks for joining us. It's good to meet you, and thanks for putting your movie out.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate y'all having me.
Thank you for listening. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you can get your podcast. If you think about it, subscribe. Next week, as I mentioned, Chris will join us. Both Chris's will be here when we really do Barney and the Cave Rescue. Until then, Christopher, be well.
Oh.